Good morning, everyone. We are waiting a few minutes now for other attendees to join, and we'll be starting shortly. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to discuss InMed Pharmaceuticals. My name is Joe Green, Investor Relations of InMed, and I will be moderating this call today. Before we begin, as a publicly listed company, it is important that investors take note of the forward-looking statements provided at the beginning of the presentation. Please note that all statements, other than statements of historical fact, are statements that could be deemed forward-looking statements. A complete discussion of the risks and uncertainties facing the company appears in the company's filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission and in the company's annual information form dated September 23rd, 2020, a copy of which is available on SEDAR at www.sedar.com. I'd also like to note that we are recording today's presentation. With me today from InMed, we have Eric Adams, Chief Executive Officer, and Bruce Colwill, Chief Financial Officer. Eric and Bruce will be running through InMed's recent progress, after which we'll be hosting a Q&A session. A large number of questions were received ahead of today's presentation, which together with any questions received throughout the call, we would do our best to address in today's 45-minute session. If you would like to submit a question at any point, please do so by using the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom application. With that being said, I'll hand it over to you, Eric.
Great, thanks, Joe, for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Really appreciate you taking the time today to join us. We had a very large response and a lot of people registered for this webinar, and so we're glad that we'll have this opportunity to provide an update on recent progress made at InMed. So for people who may be new to the story, we're not going to go through the soup to nuts presentation. That would take too much time, but really what we want to do is provide an update on the individual programs that we have going on at the company. But just as a way of introduction, InMed is a pharmaceutical company that's developing cannabinoid-based therapies to treat diseases that are deemed to have a high unmet medical need. We focus on rare cannabinoids, starting with one called cannabinol, that's abbreviated CBN. We think there's a lot of therapeutic potential for this class of compounds, and really what we're trying to do is unlock the potential to treat a number of different diseases. We're starting primarily with dermatology and ocular diseases, so we focus on topical applications of CBN to treat various diseases, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Also importantly, we've developed an advanced manufacturing system called Integrison. This is designed to be an integrated manufacturing approach that uses an enzyme to efficiently produce bioidentical, economical, and pharmaceutical grade cannabinoids. And we'll give you an update on that program as well. But cannabinoids in general, there's been a lot of non-clinical research that has opened up the fact that different cannabinoids can have different effects in the human body in a very wide range of potential applications. GW Pharma, which was recently acquired by Jazz Pharmaceuticals, really is the leader in the area of pharmaceutical development of cannabinoids. They've been at it for close to 20 years now, I guess. They have a product called Epidiolex that is essentially a CBD oil that's used to treat different forms of epilepsy. It's interesting because they're the leader in this field. They're the first ones to kind of break through with an FDA approval. And even in an indication that has less than 100,000 patients, they've been able to generate over $500 million in revenues with that one product. So that kind of is an interesting benchmark to keep in mind as we start to talk about other applications for cannabinoids in treating disease. We focus on the use of CBN in a couple of different diseases. One of them is glaucoma and other ocular diseases, and the other is dermatology, including epidermolysis bullosa. Now, those two market segments combined has a total accessible market of over $8 billion. So it's a very large market segment. There's a lot of unmet medical needs that we hope to address there. And that's what we're pursuing with our pharmaceutical drug development programs. So there's really two different classifications of cannabinoids. The major cannabinoids, which include THC and CBD, they have that moniker because they occur in very large quantities in the plant. They're very easy to extract from the plant. And because of that, they've been researched over the last 30, 40 years in a number of different applications. And you can see at the bottom on the right-hand side there, there's a number of companies who are pursuing the application of those two compounds in treating disease. We're focusing on the left-hand side, which are the rare cannabinoids. These are ones that have been understudied. They're not completely understood in terms of their mechanisms of action. And we think there's a lot of potential there, not only to be the leader in developing these rare cannabinoids, but also establishing a lot of intellectual property and patents around their use. So currently, the two companies who are looking in this area are ourselves and GW Pharma, who's I think they're mostly focused on CBDV, which is a variant of the CBD molecule. But let's move into the update, and we'll talk first about the progress that we're making with Integrison. Just a little bit of background here. There's different ways to manufacture cannabinoids. Extraction works very well for THC and CBD because they're in such high quantities, you can get a lot out of that process. But the rare cannabinoids, because they're in such small quantities, it can be really prohibitively expensive to try and extract those out. So in order to access the rare cannabinoids, you have to turn to some other common pharmaceutical manufacturing approaches. One of them is chemical synthesis, where you just take different building blocks and you combine those together to build your cannabinoid. But it may not be the best approach. It'll work well for several, but not all cannabinoids. Similarly, biosynthesis, which is something that we specialized in using bacteria, it's another way to manufacture these cannabinoids. And you basically try to mimic in a fermentation tank the same way that the plant makes cannabinoids. We've become very good at this, but we also recognize that there were natural limitations that may lead to excess cost or may not be the best approach for all cannabinoids. So there's a lot of different ways to go at this. There's no one system that's the best for all cannabinoids. So you really have to think, how can you generate a process that will allow you to make the widest number of cannabinoids with your system. And that's really where we came up with Integrison. We call Integrison cannabinoid version 2.0. Version 1 is, can you get a system to make the cannabinoid, such as biosynthesis with either yeast or bacteria? We successfully cracked that code a few years ago, but we realized that in order to make this commercial, there's a number of other factors you need to focus on, not just making it. A lot of people figured out how to make it, but can you make it in a way that is cost effective? So really the things that we started to focus on beyond just making the cannabinoid is how do you get past any yield limitations that naturally happen in these different systems? How can you do this using commonly available and cost-efficient starting materials? Because the starting materials are really one of the key drivers for the costs that you face in this process. How can you flexibly shift from the production of one cannabinoid to a range of cannabinoids? That's another factor that we took into account. are there ways to optimize the different steps to produce a very high yield pharmaceutical grade cannabinoids and do this at commercial scale? And importantly, is the technology transferable so that you can move from one manufacturing site to another very easily without any big trip ups? And so that's really what we focused on as we imagined and started to create the Integrison approach. So basically, what we've done is come up with an enzyme system that can make cannabinoids and then be converted into any of the other different cannabinoids, in particular the rare cannabinoids. Doesn't exclude the opportunity to make the major cannabinoids, but most importantly for us, because we're trying to develop these as pharmaceutical products, is that we have a system available to make the rare cannabinoids. So just by way of an update in terms of where we are and what we've achieved, we put out a press release the other day announcing that we've achieved a 2 gram per liter yield with this system. Now, why is that important? Most people recognize achieving 1 gram per liter as being commercially viable. And we accomplished that some time ago, but we think there's a really significant upside in terms of yield. And yield is one of the several factors that are important in determining the final cost of the product. And at the end of the day, we can all stand around and talk about our yields or this or that, but really you want to get the cost as low as possible. And there's a number of things that play into that. The yield is certainly important. We wanted to have a system that we thought was well on its way to being optimized prior to moving into large scale production. And we've done that at smaller scale now, and we can proceed into larger scale. We've also figured out how to use really low cost starting materials. Another important factor is, we could basically manufacture a batch in less than a day, start to finish. Whereas when you're using biosynthesis, it can take anywhere from 5 to 10 days to grow up your batch and actually get the production done. So, manufacturing time, we're 1/5 to 1/7, maybe even 1/10 of what other people are going to be looking at. We can move this to any scale that we want to. We can vary which cannabinoids we want to make. And we can do this all at pharmaceutical grade. So, we think that we piece together all of the components that are necessary to be successful in moving this into the commercial setting. So we're really excited about that. We think this really unlocks the door for us to be looking at doing this at much larger scale, and we'll be proceeding along those lines in the coming months. I just put in a slide here about pharmaceutical quality cannabinoids. We have a really good white paper on our website that was written by Mike Wodenberg, who's our Vice President of Chemistry, Manufacturing, and Control, and Karen Long, who is our Senior Director of Drug Development. And really what we want to do is just provide an educational tool so that people understand the differences between GMP. There's different grades of GMP. When we talk about GMP, we're always talking about pharma grade. It's the highest, it's the most stringent, the most rigorous, and that's really what we want to achieve with our process. You can see that for on the table, dietary supplements, and especially medicinal cannabis, which is actually the flower. It's just a complete ball game from what we're trying to accomplish here. So it's a good opportunity if you want to understand more about that, understand what we mean when we talk about pharmaceutical grade GMP or good manufacturing practices. What we're trying to achieve here. So in summary, just kind of looking at where we are and what we've got going on, as we said, we achieved this 2 gram per liter yield. Now, we don't think we're done. We think there's still opportunity to improve on that. And we will let people know after we've been successful in doing that. We don't want to be one of the companies who just make wild predictions that never come true. We want to actually complete it, do it, check the data, be certain, and then we'll let people know what we've accomplished. We're going to continue to talk to people about partnerships for the Integrison system, and potentially there's an opportunity here that we could license this. I don't think we'd be interested in divesting it, but certainly working with other people who may have specific needs for different cannabinoids that we can be helpful with. Currently, for our own manufacturing purposes, and as we move forward and scale up to larger scale, we'll be working with Almac, which has been a really great collaborator for us with a lot of know-how and a lot of the equipment that we need. So At the end of the day, we don't have our own manufacturing facility. Doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of excess capacity out there in the world. We'll just tap into that and use that to our benefit. We're continuing to work to optimize the pathways for other cannabinoids. We're working on the end-to-end process integration and GMP readiness. So GMP is not just a system of manufacturing, it's a documentation of that system. So you test at every stage along the way, you heavily document the process so that it is reproducible and consistent. So that's what GMP is. It's not just the process, it's all of the documentation that wraps around that. So we want to have to be in a position to be GMP ready in the next couple of months. And then this year we want to produce a batch with a target output of 1 kilogram of a selected cannabinoid using this GMP ready process. So that is essentially going from where we are now at smaller scale going into large scale. Once you make that leap with this process, it doesn't matter if you're at 500 liters, 1,000 liters, 10,000 liters, you basically have your whole process locked down. So this is a demonstration batch to show that it is GMP ready, excuse me. And from there, we can go into any size production that we need. Now, the one thing that's important is as we go up into larger and larger production sizes, there are additional opportunities to optimize the system and increase your yield overall. So we're not stuck at this 2 grams per liter. It's really a starting point for us, but it's an important starting point. So we're really proud of the work that's going on there. We've got some really great, not only internal, but external collaborators who have been assisting in that, and that program is well on track. I'm going to switch now and talk a little bit about the INM 755 program for epidermolysis bullosa. For those who are not familiar with this disease, it's often called the worst disease that you've never heard of. It's a genetic condition that affects the integrity of the skin, making it very easy to tear or blister the skin. And these become very difficult to treat wounds. There's anywhere from 12,500 to 25,000 patients with this in the United States, depending on which reference you use. And so globally, you would think about this as being 50,000 patients. Keep in mind, when we talked about GW Pharma, they have 100 million or 100,000 patients, a little under that, and that we're able to achieve, $500 million in sales and growing. So just because it's a small patient population does not mean that there's not an attractive commercial opportunity or a return on your investment for developing these pharmaceutical products. Currently, there's no approved therapies, and what we're looking to do is twofold. One is to treat the symptoms of the disease, which can be absolutely brutal. Things like pain and itch, inflammation, the way and speed with which wounds can heal. There's a number of different things that need to be treated on a day-to-day basis in these patients, just from a symptom standpoint. When we talk about things like itch, you think of the worst case of itch you've ever had. And, itch can mentally drive you crazy to the point where, and I've been through this with poison ivy, that you will scratch something until it becomes a wound, because somehow mentally we can deal easier with the pain of a wound than we can with itch. And so, you can imagine this is a really bad condition for these people because their skin is so fragile to start with. So we're looking at kind of the two-pronged approach. One is the symptomatic relief, and the other is we think that cannabinoids can do some important things in upregulating proteins in the skin that may be able to impact the integrity of the skin and help build a stronger bond between the epidermis and the dermis, which is one of the characteristics of this disease. We announced this morning in a press release that we have submitted the clinical trial applications in 3 countries, Austria, Israel, and Serbia, and that in the coming days and weeks, we'll be looking to submit in France, Germany, Greece, and Italy. So that's the countries where we'll be conducting this phase 2 study in EB. A clinical trial application essentially is the same thing as an investigational new drug application that you would submit to the FDA. So a lot of people are familiar with the term IND. They're not so familiar with the term CTA. So outside of the US, you typically refer to it as a CTA. So everything's on track. You know, our team is absolutely working night and day to get this study up and running with a really good contract research organization. And we're on track to begin patient enrollment in the third quarter of 2021. So once we get the documents submitted, you know, there'll be some interaction with the regulatory authorities, the national competent authorities. There may be some slight modifications that have to happen, but we've already identified the sites where this trial is going to take place. And once we get the approval from these individual national competent authorities, we'll be able to start enrolling patients. So it's a very tedious process, a lot of moving parts, but we think we're well on top of that, and we're in a good position to move forward with that program. Some of the things that you know, we are looking forward to in 2021. We reported the results from our second healthy volunteer study earlier this year. As I said, we are finalizing and filing the regulatory submissions in all the different countries. We finalized our manufacturing methods to produce the skin cream for this trial. We're in the process of producing those clinical batches. We will be initiating the trial in all of the European and other jurisdictions. Israel is included in that pool. And importantly, we're looking to try and find other applications where INM-755 may be beneficial in treating other diseases of the skin. Right now, we're going through a rigorous evaluation of a lot of the preclinical data. So the in vitro, the cell line data, the early animal data, to understand how CBN was affecting different cellular pathways in the skin. So that analysis is ongoing. Once we have that information pooled together, we anticipate having a meeting with key opinion leaders, or KOLs, to talk about that and try to identify areas where there's high unmet medical need and where we think INM-755 can bring additional benefit. You know, we'd like to move that quicker, but right now we're absolutely slammed trying to get the clinical trial up and running. So it's still on our radar screen. Some work's going on behind the scene, and we look forward to having that opinion leader meeting probably early in the second half of the year. It might be a little delayed just because of everything else that's going on, but it's certainly important to us, and we will be continuing to evaluate that. So we're going to switch now to talk about INM-088, which is our glaucoma product. So basically, you know, what is glaucoma? Glaucoma is the buildup of fluid in the front of the eye, which can be either a result of overproduction of the fluid or poor drainage of the fluid. And once you have that fluid built up, it exerts pressure through the eye to the back of the eye, which is where the neurons are that are responsible for vision. So they're called retinal ganglion cells. And they're these delicate structure of neurons that are coating the back of the eye here. Now, that constant pressure over time leads to blindness. It kills those individual cells, and that's irreversible. So what you try to do in treating glaucoma is either increase the drainage. There's a tissue here called the trabecular meshwork. You can essentially think of it as you know, a woven tissue that needs to be relaxed so that the water can kind of flow in between and be released. When that tenses up, you have the water that, or the fluid that gets blocked. So you want to relax that, and that's really what most of the drugs do. Some of the drugs reduce the production of the fluid, so that achieves the same thing. Now, when we looked at this in our preclinical models, you can see, and also in vivo models, most cannabinoids, several different ones, demonstrate increased drainage, leading to the reduced intraocular pressure. So reducing this pressure, you know, keeps it from proactively killing the neurons at the back. So a lot of cannabinoids do this. You know, in particular, we see CBN doing that. We see THC doing that. CBD to a much less effect. It for some reason isn't as active. But we also looked at the neural protection. And what we found there is that CBN, far and away, at least in the studies we conducted, is the cannabinoid of choice for neuroprotection. So if you set aside what's going on up here, if you just look at the neurons at the back of the eye, CBN proactively goes there and protects these neurons from cell death. It prolongs their survival. Under normal conditions, it'll do that, but it also does that under elevated pressure conditions. So suddenly you've got something here that, well, wait a minute, you know, neural death isn't only present in glaucoma, it's present in a lot of ocular diseases. Maybe CBN can be an effective treatment, an add-on to other current therapies in order to preserve vision for a longer period of time. And so that's really what we're focused on, and that's the nature of our patent, is looking at the neural protection. So, you know, we think we have a compound that can do two things. One is, you know, reduce the IOP by increasing the drainage of the fluid, but secondly, protecting these neurons. And we think that's a very interesting approach. Some of the things that we're doing this year, first of all, we are working with a clinical research organization to develop the clinical game plan, because now we need to start to think, okay, if we do a trial that is for reducing intraocular pressure, that's one kind of trial. If we do it looking at neural protection, that's another kind of trial. Do we combine those trials? Do we keep them separate? Which one happens first? You need to really map out what the game plan is going to be. And then it's a good idea to go and check with the FDA and say, you know, this is roughly what we have in mind. Do you think, you know, in general, that we're on the right track? So that's one of the questions you might ask in a pre-IND meeting. Another thing that you want to check with the FDA is, this is the toxicology plan that we have going forward. We're going to go and conduct these studies. Once we do that, do you agree we'll be able to move into human trials? And so you want to get some buy-in to that up front. You can see on this chart, we say the pre-IND meeting if needed. We say if needed because ocular studies are pretty standard. We have a lot of experience internally at the company here, as well as with our consultants in ocular disease. So we know quite a bit about it. And, you know, we don't want to waste anyone's time by going to the FDA if we don't need to. So we're still evaluating that right now. And, you know, we'll keep people updated on what the decision is there. Other things that we're doing is we're scaling up the drug product. We have submitted our early preclinical data to a peer-reviewed journal. It's under review now, and we look forward to that being published so we can actually share with people why we're so excited about the data that we've seen and why we think this is a great approach. And then we have to get into the toxicology studies that prepare for entering human clinical trials. So we've got a lot on our plate with this program as well. We're very excited about it. We think it's a tremendous opportunity. And if you look at all of the major ocular companies out there, they all have research programs in neuroprotection. This is kind of the next wave of drugs that are going to come into the ocular space. And so we're right in the middle of this sweet spot of research into neuroprotection in the eye. So that's it for the three programs that we have, the two therapeutic programs and the manufacturing. One of the things that we have been successful with last year, and we're going to be continuing into the coming years, is business development. We have a number of different relationships. Some of them are collaborative research agreements, some of them are licensing agreements, but really this is going to form kind of the basis for building the company going forward. We think we have a lot of interesting technologies that others may be interested in. We think there's some other technologies out there and approaches that we are interested in. So we're going to continue to keep our eyes open and engage in discussions and potential business development with companies as we go forward. So I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing me talk. I'm going to let Bruce jump in and maybe cover the summary slide here.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'll go through this pretty quick, cognizant of time. We do want to leave some more time here for the Q&A as possible. So, you know, I think just probably makes sense to step back a bit and look a little bit at some of the highlights from 2020 as well, because that basically has set the stage for what Eric's laid out is going to happen in 2021. Looking first at our INM 755 program. In 2020, we had our first human clinical trials, a huge milestone for the company, as we completed our two phase 1 trials. One was in normal, one in wounded skin. And that basically set the stage for going into phase 2, as Eric's talked about, and that's going to enable us to keep on track to hit our enrollment milestones this year. In the ocular program, which is frankly the program with huge upside, as Eric just walked us through, the work that we did in 2020, with the proof of concept and formulation studies, having licensed in the MyDrops technology, has that stage now for us to start scaling up the manufacturing as we prepare to do all those IND enabling studies, and ultimately for, for a planned IND in the first half of 2020. For the Integrison program, which is a key focus and remains a key focus for the company, as we announced on Monday, throughout 2020 and 2021, we've been able to significantly improve our overall yields as well as the overall manufacturing process. We also initiated the collaboration with BayMedica that Eric touched on. So looking forward, 2021, it's a big year for Integrison as we demonstrate GMP readiness, and we're also on track to produce a batch of 1 kilogram batch of rare cannabinoid. So very excited about that key milestone. And then lastly, on the financing front, 2020, we set the stage where we listed on NASDAQ in conjunction with an IPO, raising the initial $8 million. We were able to top that up in February with an additional $4.5 million. Then as we announced, there's been a lot of press releases, as we announced yesterday, we are in the process of the voluntary delisting from the TSX. TSX historically has been really beneficial, been a great place, but with the NASDAQ listing now completed, we're seeing 85–86% of our volume trading on the NASDAQ, and combined with the cost of maintaining that listing, costs include, filing fees, regulatory fees, there's legal fees, there's our time, management time associated with it. We just looked at the cost benefit and just said it made sense to reallocate that effort and that capital to our programs rather than to the TSX listing. So that we'll see that delisting happening on May 7th, be our last day trading on the TSX. We have a FAQs on our website as well. There's a link to it through the press release if people have questions on that. So basically, last year, 2020 was a really big year for the company, and it set us up well for another great year in 2021. With that, I'll hand it over to Joe.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric and Bruce. We'll now move on to the Q&A session. We have a number of questions received via email that we'll be running through, in addition to a few that have come in throughout Eric's presentation. As a reminder, if you would like to submit a question, please do so via the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom application. I'll be reading each question aloud and then handing the line over to Eric or Bruce to address the questions. Some of the questions were similar and have been consolidated at this time. Our first question begins with the talk about the production of the 1 kilogram batch. How does this compare to competitors who are producing thousands of liters? What are the economic benefits of Integrison compared to other types of manufacturing, yeast and chemical biosynthesis, for example? What is the yield for Integrison and how does that compare with others? And a question just submitted live, what is the relevance of the 2 gram liter as it relates to other programs?
Yeah, so let me touch on that first. The 2 gram per liter doesn't impact our therapeutic programs per se. It just tells us that we're on the path to being able to produce the rare cannabinoids that we need for further development. So we only talk about the 2 therapeutic programs. We don't talk about the other things that we have in R&D, which is very interesting. Yeah, so they're really kind of 2.
I think, Eric, the question on the 2 grams per liter, I think the question was really, and you can cover it when you cover off the broader question. I think the question is like 2 grams per liter, is that relevant relative to what other people in the
Sure.
biosynthesis, chemical synthesis space are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall seeing anybody who's reported being at the 2 gram per liter level. There's a lot of people who are moving up and scaling up and are trying to find efficiencies as they scale up to increase their yield. But from our perspective, it never made a lot of sense to take a bad process and scale it up. Anyone can do that. We can have a very inefficient process and we can run that at 10,000 liters. To us, it made the most sense to find the most optimal process that we can get, one that we think is going to be very commercially viable and lead to low costs overall. And that's what we decided to go forward with. We were making cannabinoids in E. coli biosynthesis process years ago, but that wasn't the point. The point was, how can you do this in a way that makes the most sense from a commercial standpoint? So, we focused on yield, we focused on low cost starting materials. We got this into a process that takes 1 day to do, less than 1 day versus, a week or more, which tremendously impacts the cost. And now it's just a matter of scaling it up. So we're in a very good position to move quickly into larger scales. And as I said, diversify into other cannabinoids. So certainly there's people out there who have 10,000 liter vats. That's great. I mean, breweries have 10,000 liter vats. That's great. We think we have the best process and what will lead to the lowest cost in doing this.
Thank you. The next question is, InMed the sole proprietor of the production process Integrison? Is it patent protected? Does InMed have to pay some royalties, fees, or other revenue to other patent owners in case of commercial production via Integrison?
I'll grab this one. So basically, aside from a very small royalty to UBC, basically a sub 1% royalty to UBC that might be payable only on certain applications of an E. coli biosynthesis process, only then does InMed have to pay something. But basically InMed, other than that, InMed retains all commercial rights to Integrison. I mean, you hear us reference LMAC, we did in our press release, Eric did a few minutes earlier. I mean, certainly their expertise has been really important to us and has enabled us to really advance the program. But LMAC does not have a royalty or retain an economic interest in the process. So regarding the other part of the question on the patent side, yes, we have filed several patents on all aspects of the manufacturing technologies. And we also continue to refine those patents to best protect them. And then lastly, we're always looking at the potential for new patents. They're always under continuous consideration as we look to expand the overall commercial protection of the Integrison program. So bottom line is InMed basically owns all of the Integrison's commercial rights and economics. Joe?
Thank you. The next question revolves around glaucoma. Will InMed seek partnerships or to license their patents?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Absolutely. I mean, it's a long, expensive process to develop drugs. Certainly we're not in a position to pay for everything to go all the way through to commercialization at this point. So we have to entertain opportunities for business development with other companies. We don't comment on discussions. You see some people putting out a press release that they had a meeting. We don't do that. So we think we're in a very attractive area of ocular disease and drug candidates. We think that the interest will continue to grow as we present this data, as we publish, for instance, the early work that we've done in a peer-reviewed journal. So we think that interest is going to continue to grow in this, and with the right partner at the right time, we would definitely be interested in some kind of collaboration that would help accelerate and offset some of the costs for the company.
Thank you. During the presentation, BayMedica was discussed. Could you elaborate what is going on with the BayMedica collaboration?
Yeah, let me take that. So BayMedica, we established a collaboration with them, and it's a really interesting group. They've got a lot of experts in manufacturing. They have some guys who have a tremendous history in yeast biosynthesis, which goes back like decades. I mean, they're really knowledgeable, and it's a really good group to work with. And so, we got discussing the different programs. A couple of things really kind of came to the surface. One was that they wanted to look at the Integrison approach that we're taking, and in particular, the enzyme that we custom made that helps drive the yields of cannabinoid manufacturing. So they wanted to take that and play around with that gene basically for the enzyme in their yeast biosynthesis system. So we shared with them the sequence to one of the enzymes. They've had to make some changes to it so that it works in yeast. And they've now tested it, and they've had I guess some indications of it being successful in their process, but we haven't sat down with them and reviewed their data yet, so we can't really report on anything there other than they've seen some positive indications, and if that leads to anything, we'll let people know. The flip side of that is BayMedica has filed patents on analogs and different variants of cannabinoids. So basically taking the naturally occurring cannabinoids and adding different chemical groups to that molecule that may potentiate its effect in treating diseases, maybe reducing side effects, maybe in enhanced delivery to the cells. And so it's a very interesting approach, something that we've been considering, but they have a very broad patent. It probably covers hundreds, if not thousands, of different molecules. So we worked with them to try to identify a set of molecules that we think may hold important potential. We worked to identify what those are going to be. They had to custom manufacture those. They didn't have them sitting on a shelf somewhere. And so they have successfully manufactured those. Right now, we're just waiting for Health Canada approval to be able to import those into Canada and actually conduct the testing that we want to do for the initial screening process. We can't control, the Health Canada permitting system. It's taking much longer than we would have liked, but essentially that's on track, and both of those aspects of the research collaboration are moving forward. So those are the kinds of things. It's early stage. It's not impactful on the other programs that we have going on. It's independent of the other programs that we're doing, but nevertheless could hold some important findings and some important potential for the company going forward. And those are the kinds of business development, collaborations that we're looking to conduct more of.
Thank you. Switching the focus now, what are the legal ramifications of listing on the NASDAQ and focusing on the US? Will the US cannabis laws impact InMed's ability to work with US companies? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess there's different ways to look at that question. In terms of the regulation, the pharmaceutical industry is already the most regulated industry out there. So, as we think about doing business in the US, we have to not only think of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, we have to think about the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, who still has some overview of cannabinoids, in particular THC. And of course, we have to think about the ramifications of the SEC and the NASDAQ regulations. So, as a pharma company, we're already taking all those things into consideration. So, we're not a cannabis company. We're not viewed as a cannabis company. We don't grow anything. We don't sell things that you smoke. So we're a little bit different and less affected by the cannabis-directed regulations and the legalization, if you will, across the different states. So, if we move into, bulk cannabinoid sales, then of course we got to pay attention to another set of regulations and how those are going to be regulated in the US. So right now, essentially we're very well positioned for this because we're already, heavily regulated. And we have to understand the nuances maybe a little bit differently if we go into bulk cannabinoid sales. But other than that, there's no real difference to what we have been doing and what we continue to do.
Thank you. Next question is regarding the management and buying shares. Why do we not see management buying shares at a low price?
Yeah,
Rich, want to take that?
Yeah, let me grab that one. But hey, Joe, I noticed that it's 8:44 here. We kind of said 8:45 ending, but I suggest we extend the time here a little bit because there's still a number of questions to get to, if that's all right.
Understood. We can continue.
Okay. So, management. Why is management like? Well, I mean, basically, from time to time, the executive team and the board are actually prohibited from trading the shares. There's a number of reasons for this. They can include For example, mandated blackout periods, and they're generally associated with things like our quarterly earnings calls, pre and post news releases, as you have seen this week, and just generally, generally during periods of time when the company has, important confidential information which has not yet been made public. So during all those periods of time, are effectively blacked out. So in reality, this actually means there's only a limited number of days per year when the executives and the board can actually purchase shares on the market. It is worth noting, though, because we've been asked this before, it's worth noting that the company is actually prohibited from communicating or signaling about such blackouts or lockouts. We can't talk about the existence or the reason or the timing of those blackouts or lockouts. So, that's why what you're seeing right now. Joe?
Yeah, I think if you looked at an analysis, it would be, only a number of days. I mean, less than 30 days a year where we are fully disclosed to the markets in terms of, what we're working on and what we know, and are able to actually trade. It's a very, very low number. And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And, we're certainly looking to stay on side with all of the regulations in that regard.
Thank you. In light of the time, there have been some questions submitted today, as well as others provided in advance regarding the company's NASDAQ listing and financings that are somewhat related. So I've tried to combine them into one question that covers all of these topics. So with that being said, does InMed believe it did the right thing heading to NASDAQ? Has there been institutional investor demand? And can you explain the timing of the listing relative to the company's financing, especially in light of the recent share performance?
Yeah,
Chris, you want that one?
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Let me cover that and jump in, Eric. But I guess just as a way of reminder, prior to the November 20 financing that we did, InMed's last capital raise was during our 2017-2018 fiscal year. So it's almost 2.5 years later that we raised the capital in that NASDAQ IPO. Our original aim when we first filed with the SEC, as you'll see in the SEC documents, was to raise US $10 to $12 million concurrent with that IPO. We were able to close 8 million of that in November 20, but being able to raise the full fundraising target was very important so we could fully support all of our therapeutic programs as well as the Integrison program. So after that, we did receive a number of inbound inquiries, basically including from some of the institutional investors that participated in the November IPO. And they were asking about, are there any further investment opportunities? So we were ultimately able to capitalize on that interest and to achieve our full fundraising goal of $12 million. But recall at the time that this interest was due in part to sort of a broader recognition about cannabinoid-based therapeutics and the opportunity that they provide, the opportunity to generate significant value. Because it was in February of that same month, in February 2021, that the announcement Eric mentioned earlier, where GW was acquired by Jazz Pharmaceuticals for US $7 billion. With respect to the institutional part of the question, yes, institutional investors played a big role in both the November NASDAQ listing and the February 2021 PIPE or private placement. One of the reasons we made the move to the NASDAQ is that the NASDAQ is an exchange on which more institutional investors are willing to trade. So the NASDAQ listing was or is an important move for us. Share price, yeah. We likewise have been very disappointed with the share price performance, especially given, the fundamentals of all of our programs are stronger than ever. So what we're continuing to do is focus on those fundamentals. We're moving our individual programs forward. We're hitting the important milestones that we've communicated to the market, we're looking to build value through all aspects of the company. It is incumbent on us to make sure we communicate all those to both our existing shareholders and also to new shareholders. So we'll be looking to do more of that. And by doing all those things, we're confident the market will recognize that we are substantially undervalued here, and we ultimately see that reflected in the share price. But moving to the NASDAQ, it was important. It was necessary for the company. The universe of potential investors is very much expanded by being on the NASDAQ. We now have the ability to get more institutional eyeballs on the story. And we're going to continue to try to increase the institutional ownership. And we're going to be spending more time communicating the story as we continue to hit our milestones.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, Bruce, is that the February private placement was done at essentially the same terms as the IPO in November. The share price was slightly lower, but not meaningfully lower. So we saw that as an opportunity to top up the treasury and actually raise the amount that we initially communicated that we wanted to raise. So we did that opportunistically, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to do that because what we're doing is not inexpensive, and we're in a very comfortable position now, and it allows us to do some consideration for other types of business development that is going to be important for growing the company in a number of different ways.
Thank you, everyone. With the time being said now, that is all we have time for today. Thank you, everyone, for submitting these questions, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join this call. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to us directly. Our email addresses and telephone numbers are listed in the presentation on the screen now and on every InMed press release, and we'll be happy to speak to anyone with any additional queries. Thank you again, everyone, for your time and attending and joining.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.